Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and co-producer here on HORUFADHI Media alongside HORUFADHI. On this week's program, as Somalia continues to be ravaged by the drought, Behind the Scenes assesses the climate and environmental challenges facing the country and the role Somali youth can play. We'll be particularly looking at the recent HORUFADHI Media Group program on Twitter, where we had a panel guests ranging from ministers to Somali youth experts and environmentalist experts on how Somalia can best tackle the environmental climate issue facing the country and the role Somali youth can play. Now, this is a topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program and where you can find other exclusive programs such as the African Weekly Roundup and Mhahisal, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Sulaiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. According to experts, Somalia is experiencing its worst drought crisis in a decade, with millions of Somalis going hungry and being forced from their homes in search of food and water across other parts of Somalia. We've seen dozens of IDP camps prop up across southern and central Somalia as more families flee the countryside. Earlier this month, the United Nations humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths warned that Somalia is on the brink of a famine following the worst drought in 4 decades. During a news conference in Mogadishu, Griffiths said he had concrete indications that the famine may occur in the southern Bai region of southwest states by the end of this year. Now, Griffiths visited various regions and towns across the country, including Baydhabo and the surrounding regions, and the capital Mogadishu. Overall, the United Nations and Somalia government say 7.8 million people nationwide are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance as the drought drags on and the food situation gets worse. Now, more than 850,000 people are in currently affected areas, with tens of thousands more arriving in the months to come, according to the UN experts. The reality is that the climate change continues to damage Somalia's environment and increasing the number of famines in the country. A formal famine declaration is rare, and a warning that too little help has come too late. At least 1 million people in Somalia have been displaced by the driest drought in decades, driven by the climate change that also affects the wider Horn of Africa region, including Ethiopia and Kenya. Now, in June, the UNHCR announced that it needed $9.5 million for Somalia as part of its regional appeal for the Horn of Africa to help displaced communities affected by the catastrophic drought. Now, HORUFADHI Media organized an online discussion on the aforementioned subject in light of the severe and dire socio-environmental conditions that Somalia is currently experiencing, and what role Somali youth both at home and abroad could do or play to support and raise awareness of climate change, an alien concept in Somalia and among Somali people up until now. The goal was to increase public awareness of the negative effects of climate change and the related socio-economic issues, while emphasizing the role youth can play in combating this issue, with the crux of the event being exchange of scientific and local knowledge, as well as ideas in search of answers to these problems. Now, participants included, but were not limited to, the State Minister for Environment and Climate Change of Somalia, Adam A. Hassan, as representatives from local NGOs, the Somali Climate Youth Action Citizens, Somali environmental professionals. The general topic of the debate was environmental deterioration and related social effects brought on by both climate change and human activity. One of the initial queries raised at the meeting was whether these difficulties were entirely caused by natural events or whether human activity also played a role. Another concern was the extent and availability of national, regional and local initiatives, plans, programs, or even strategies that would be proactively addressing these challenges. Now, an issue that comes into mind automatically is the current charcoal crisis in the country. The UN Convention to Combat Desertification, known as UNCCD, said an estimated 8.2 million trees were cut down for charcoal in Somalia between 2011 and 2017. Now, that's just 6 years. This has increased land degradation, food insecurity, vulnerability to droughts, which we can currently see in 2022. We've seen it in 2021. We've seen it in 2019. Now, this directly impacts the environment in the country, and this has directly resulted in the increase in desertification, which of course then has a domino effect on the ecosystems, the environment, things that are needed by the wildlife of Somalia to survive. And many Somalis who are pastoralists or that are nomadic tend to survive on these animals. Now, according to numerous environmentalists, Somalia is currently facing a crisis that poses a major humanitarian conundrum. As we've mentioned, droughts, desertification, the scarce water supplies, deforestation, charcoal commercialization, flood flushes, and starvation. In recent years, these tragedies have become far more frequent and intense. We've seen the most series of droughts in the last decade in Somalia that Somalia has ever seen. And the forum also covered other important topics, such as the negative effects of oil and gas exploration, which I will be discussing further in the program. Now, climate change. Let's talk about that in more detail, because it's played a significant role in making droughts in the Horn of Africa more intense and rain less predictable. In fact, the Earth's temperature has already risen by 1.1 degrees, and unfortunately, Somalia is listed by the UN as one of the most vulnerable countries in the world to this changing climate. And this isn't just because of Somalia's geographical location, it's also because of Somalia's ill-prepared government and people. It is predicted that Somalia's temperature would increase by 3 degrees by the end of this century. Now, it might sound very limited, but this has a detrimental impact on the climate of Somalia. Now, the change in climate is due to various reasons, and one of them is emissions from developed countries, which is the main reason, and mainly from Western countries and China. However, rarely has this resulted in an increased sense of responsibility or support for countries grappling with the side effects of the industrialization elsewhere in the globe. We've seen, industrialization go on all over the globe, but the reality is that the countries that are the poorest, that have the inability financially, technology, or just experience and knowledge to deal with the climate change, are the ones who are facing the consequences. And it's the countries that have industrialized with the money now, with the power, that are not supporting poorer countries like Somalia or Bangladesh, who are currently at the forefront of the battle against climate change. Now, expert guests and ministers highlighted on our panel that Somalia's rural areas, as I aforementioned, are most affected by this climate change. Not only can droughts, desertification, water shortages, and food shortages directly affect the local people, but it also has a serious and detrimental effect on their way of life, which is dependent on the very livestock, on the very animals, and on the substance of farming. Now, Somalis are known for their nomadic lifestyle, and for many, reliance on animal livestock, reliance on farming is the only way to live. And for these people living in the countryside, they are forced to flee, not only by these environmental effects, but there's also security issues currently. But these particular climate change impacts are the ones that are causing these people to flee to IDP camps across major towns and cities in Somalia. We see what's going on in Baydhabo, in Doosamareb, in Johar. We see what's going on in Mogadishu. So what role can the government play? On our panel, State Minister for the Environment and Climate Change of Somalia, Adan Hassan, outlined the role and vision of Somalia's new Ministry of Environment and Climate with regards to environmental protection, in particular, the focus being combating climate change in Somalia. As climate change is a global crisis, the minister discussed COP27 and meetings he recently held with his African counterparts at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Now, the minister also emphasized the significance of having targeted and nationally tailored strategies and policies to couple with local and scientific knowledge while considering the best and most cost-effective available technology to address environmental changes while achieving sustainable development. The minister also expressed worry about the extreme pressures that maritime activities such as oil and gas development and the dumping of hazardous waste into the ocean, as well as more exploration, are having on the marine habitats on Somalia's coasts. Now, we know in 2004, 2005, and particularly in those mid-2000 periods, many countries and illegal organizations and entities were throwing away nuclear waste on Somalia's coasts. And those are even reports found that rogue elements within Italy were reported to be working directly with rogue elements and criminal organizations to dump illegal toxic waste on Somalia's coast. Now, this has directly affected Somalis because studies have shown on coastal communities in Somalia that those people that are born after this period tend to have particular diseases that are related to radioactive and other chemicals that wasn't previously found in Somalia. So this is evidence of the very issue being faced on our health, particularly Somalis living on the coast. But we can also imagine the effects it's having on the habitats of those rich and diverse ecosystems on Somalia's coasts. Now, Somalia is currently looking to exploit oil reserves at a time where the globe is seeking to move away from the hazardous chemicals that have damaged our atmosphere. Many developed countries are aiming for net zero carbon emissions by 2030, for instance, which demonstrates the direction the globe is moving to. And for Somalia, recent policies by the Joint Ministerial Committee on the signing of contracts and the interests of major oil companies indicate the government could be signing deals in the coming years, although there has been many objections from federal member states on the framework being put forth by the government. And the government must take into consideration the detrimental effects of oil and gas exploration and usage on our environment at a time where Somalia is in an uphill battle against climate change. And lastly, the government can introduce new national programs, for instance, to increase green space, tree planting, encouraging farming to make Somalia more self-sufficient and tackle climate change in a much better and efficient way. So, now what role can the youth play? The involvement of local youth-focused NGOs like Somali Climate Youth Action set this year's climate change summit apart from others. Nations all over the globe agree that the youth will be better able to combat climate change because of their capacity to implement reforms required to mitigate its effects, because climate change is a long-term project. How to deal with it is a long-term project. The way it came about was a long-term issue. It started from the industrialization over 200 years ago. It built and got to where it is today. And likewise, the torch must be passed now to the youth to start building the foundations for the next generation to combat this very climate change that could end our global, the world that we live in. Now, several young people spoke about their experiences at the event held by HORUFADHI. However, it is acknowledged that one of the biggest barriers keeping Somali youth from reaching their potential is the lack of financial support. Now, despite this, the majority of Somali youth we've spoken to here in HORUFADHI work voluntarily, which demonstrates commitment from the Somalis. And it also demonstrates awareness. And the government can provide loans, for instance, and programs via international support to financially support and incentivize these youths to partake in the fight against climate change. Somali business tycoons and corporations, for instance, Horumud, must also provide private sector support to young Somalis and others that are working to tackle some of the issues faced by citizens, including food shortages, among others. Now, let's take a closer look at the oil and gas exploration issue in Somalia. Now, the role of this production of oil and gas could play in Somalia's economic development is a well-known truth, and no one denies it. However, it is widely known that oil and gas fields and enterprises are a source of wide range of poisonous and dangerous byproducts that may unintentionally, on purpose, or negligently infiltrate the environment. It is well recognized that certain discharges of gases, including sulfur compounds, have negative effects on both the environment and human health. Hazardous solid wastes can comprise a variety of toxic substances, such as organic and inorganic waste, naturally occurring radioactive material, or NORM, whereas liquid waste is typically made up of various heavy metals and organometallics. This can result in the Minamata disease, contaminating drinking water, both surface and groundwater, as well as seawater. And this is 3 different sources of water. For many Somalis living in the countryside, groundwater or wells is the biggest source of drinking water. And the possibility of this water being contaminated could have a catastrophic effect on Somalis across the country. Now, for those that do not know, the Minamata disease is a methyl mercury poisoning with neurological symptoms and caused by the daily consumption of large quantities of fish and shellfish that are heavily contaminated with toxic chemicals generated in chemical factories and then discharged into the sea. It is also well recognized that oil and gas sectors are directly and indirectly to blame for habitat loss and ecosystem degradation. Therefore, to separate the risks from the rewards, environmental and social considerations should be placed on an equal footing with the economic considerations. Accordingly, a project-specific SEA or EIA are required prior to the project's various phases, including geophysical survey, drilling, construction, commissioning, operation, transportation, and other associated activities. Furthermore, it is well known that consequences will differ from project to project due to a variety of factors such as the sensitivity of the environment, for example, whether it's offshore or onshore, technology, and the seasons. Finally, so what recommendations have HORUFADHI put forth? Participants acknowledge the benefits of organizing a meeting like the one held by HORUFADHI promotes awareness of climate change. In response, the participants thanked HORUFADHI and requested them to organize other meetings and discussions on the subject. And we hope that this could be continued by other media organizations and outlets that want to raise this awareness, because the center to raising awareness in a democratic society is the media. The media is the crux of spreading information, whether it's fake or real news, whether it's educating or deceiving. So it's important that media organizations play a significant role in raising this awareness and bringing and gathering people together to discuss this very, very big issue. Number 2, since this is Somalia's first environment and climate change ministry introduced by the new Hassan Sheikh presidency, the panel unanimously concluded that new regulation initiatives are needed to combat environmental challenges. Of course, since this ministry is completely new, I assume the legal frameworks and powers, regulations, incentives are not fully developed to the degree that's required for the Somali government to take active steps to deal with the climate change, not just on a state, not just in Banaadir and Mogadishu, but also on federal member state levels. Because you have to understand Somalia is a federal state, and this means that federal ministers can't just go and do what they want to do across other federal states. Instead, there has to be a national agreement or agreements with federal member states prior to doing so. Number 3, the meeting underlined that the need for reliable data affecting the nation's environment in order to develop necessary policies, plans and programs to avert climate change. Moreover, Somalia needs to establish specialized research and development institutions such as environmental research, energy research, food, livestock and fishery research, water research, and so on. There needs to be government institutions or even government-funded institutions that are private, that serve the public, that do these research policies that are supported by the central government in Mogadishu. Number 4, the panel agreed that there has to be a major increase in educational incentives or initiatives aimed at changing people's attitudes around environmental activities such as deforestation and climate change. Now, Somalia has been at war for 30 years. And for many people, the idea of climate change, which was pretty much not a very big deal in 1991 in Africa, is very, very alien in 2022. For many people, Somalis don't understand what climate change is. They don't understand the repercussions deforestation could have. Therefore, the education of the masses is essential to moving forward the nation in tackling an issue that's much greater than Al-Shabaab, that is much greater than foreign policy issues. Climate change is the biggest issue currently facing Somalia. Number 5, the meeting acknowledged the tragedy of flood flush and the need to capture water using practical and affordable country-tailored water management systems, including but not limited to water policy by the government, for instance, the creation of wetlands, the establishment of emergency flood areas at the source, which would help people, rather than becoming displaced, go to these particular areas where they can be placed at. The construction of strategic dams, we see this in Ethiopia, and the use of geological reservoirs as storage facilities, among other methods. Number 6, the forum recognized the need for creating a national drought plan and urged reforestation initiatives in relation to droughts and desertification. We need to have a green initiative in Somalia. We need to have the government introducing this on a national scale. Now, we've seen a very minute scale, while it's not a green initiative per se, involving droughts, but we see in Mogadishu's Lido Beach where youths come together every week on a Friday to clean the beach from plastics and items that damage the environment there. So we need this kind of scale of initiative by the Somali people on a nationwide scale, and this requires mass education. And lastly, participants of the discussion agreed unanimously that proactive planning and environmental impact assessments should be done before beginning any oil and gas exploration. And that is the topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. We hope you enjoyed it. And please do feel free to participate in future programs held by HORUFADHI Media, where we want to engage with many more Somalis across the globe on how the country can tackle its environmental catastrophe.